The weirdest part wasn't what my parents said that night. It was the way they were sitting before they said it. Like two people waiting for a meeting to start, not a birthday dinner. I remember the sound first, a glass tapping against a plate somewhere behind me. Small, sharp, made me look up. My name is Lila Bennett. I am 19 years old. Honestly, birthdays in our house were never a big thing. A cake from the grocery store, maybe a card if my mom remembered. My dad usually had work calls. That was normal. I never thought much about it. So when they said we were going to dinner at this place downtown, I figured something else was going on. The Hawthorne Room, River North. Fancy enough that the waiter kept refilling water like it was a sport. I swear the place smelled like butter and steak grease. My dad, Gregory Bennett, kept checking his watch, not even hiding it, just flipping his wrist like he was counting down to something. My mom, Marianne, didn't touch her food. She kept adjusting the stem of her wine glass. Little movements, over and over. You ever sit across from people and suddenly feel like they've already had a conversation without you? That was the vibe. I tried to lighten it up. So, are we celebrating something besides my birthday? My mom smiled, not a real one. The polite kind she used at charity events. My dad folded his napkin and leaned forward, and that's when he said, very calmly, Lila, there's something we should have told you years ago. I laughed, not because it was funny, just because sometimes your brain stalls and you make a noise while it tries to catch up. What kind of thing my dad didn't laugh back? He looked straight at me, the way he does when he's explaining numbers to someone. You were adopted, just like that. 3 words dropped in the middle of the table. I waited for the punchline. My mom stirring her wine again, my dad cracking a smile. Nothing. Okay, I said slowly. So, is this supposed to be a joke? Marianne shook her head once. No, Lila, it's not. The glass tapping sound from earlier happened again somewhere behind me. Someone laughing at another table. The whole restaurant kept moving like normal. Meanwhile, my chest felt weirdly hollow. You're serious, I said. Gregory nodded. We meant to tell you earlier, but the timing never felt right. I stared at him. Earlier. Like, when last week? Last year? Neither of them answered. My mom took a small sip of wine. There were arrangements involved when we took you in. Arrangements. That word hit harder than the adoption part. What arrangements, I asked. My dad folded his hands like he was about to explain a business deal. You came with a financial trust. I blinked. A what? A trust. He repeated calmly. Originally valued at $420,000. For a second I thought I heard him wrong. But he kept talking, and the tone of his voice changed everything. I stared at him. A trust. I repeated. Gregory nodded like he was confirming something obvious. Yes. Established before the adoption. My mom finally set her wine glass down. The agency handling your placement was in Nevada, she said. They explained the financial structure before we agreed to take guardianship. Financial structure, I said. You mean money? Gregory didn't argue. $420,000, he said. The number just sat there between us. $420,000. You're telling me, I said slowly. I came with money attached to me. Marianne folded her hands. The trust was created by your biological family, she said. It was meant to support your upbringing. Gregory leaned forward a little, and the trustee needed a legal guardian to manage the account. And that guardian was you, I said. Yes. He didn't hesitate. I was appointed trustee when the adoption was finalized. The word trustee landed differently. So you controlled the money, I said. I administered it. Gregory corrected calmly. For 18 years. He nodded. Until you turned 18. At that point, the trust legally matured. I felt heat crawling up the back of my neck. So all those years, I said, you were managing a fund that technically belonged to me. Gregory gave a small shrug. That's one way to describe it. Marianne leaned forward. Lila, raising a child isn't free, she said. Tuition, medical care, housing. The trust existed so those costs wouldn't fall entirely on us. I let out a short laugh. You're explaining my childhood like it's a spreadsheet. Gregory held my gaze. We provided stability, he said. Then he added quietly, and the trust made that possible. For a moment, nobody spoke. I realized I was still holding my fork, hovering over a plate I hadn't touched. Gregory reached down beside his chair and lifted a leather briefcase. Yeah, he'd actually brought a briefcase to my birthday dinner. That should have told me everything. He slid a folder across the table. Take a look. I hesitated. What is it, account records? He said. Marianne gave a small nod. You should understand where things stand. So I opened it. Page after page of statements. Withdrawal records. Annual reports. Right on top was a summary. Current balance of the trust. $37,000. I blinked and read it again. 37,000. Slowly. I looked up. You said the trust started at 420,000. Gregory didn't flinch. It did. Marianne folded her hands. Trust funds aren't meant to sit untouched for 18 years. Lila. I turned another page. So where did it go? Gregory answered like he was listing expenses in a meeting. Private school tuition for 6 years. Your therapy program when you were 13. Medical insurance. College preparation courses. Marianne added quietly. The summer program in Boston. Remember that I stared at them. That still doesn't add up. Gregory tapped the folder. Trust administration fees. Investment losses during the recession. Living expenses allocated through the trust. I let the paper fall back onto the table. So nearly $400,000 just disappeared into raising me. Gregory met my eyes. It didn't disappear. Then Marianne said softly, the remaining balance was transferred to your account last month. 37,000. Yes. Gregory pushed the folder closer. And legally speaking, that concludes our financial responsibility. I looked down at the paperwork again. That's when it finally clicked. This dinner wasn't about explaining the past. It was about closing the ledger. For a few seconds I didn't say anything. Gregory seemed to think that meant he'd won the conversation. He leaned back in his chair like a deal had just closed. Marianne reached for her wine again. So, she said, almost casually, this dinner felt like the most respectful way to explain everything. Explain everything. I let that sit there for a moment. Then I closed the folder. Carefully. Slowly. You really think this is the first time I've looked at those numbers? Gregory frowned. What do you mean, I mean? I said. I noticed the statements disappearing months ago. Marianne's fingers froze on the glass. Statements. Yeah. I said. Funny thing about bank accounts. They usually send records. Gregory's voice sharpened. You went digging through financial documents that weren't yours. I shook my head. They were mine. The waiter walked past our table carrying a tray that smelled like garlic and butter. For some reason that smell stuck in my head. Marianne leaned forward. What exactly are you implying? Lila. I looked at both of them. I'm saying the numbers in that folder aren't the whole story. Gregory's jaw tightened. What story? I reached into my bag. You really want to know what I found when I started asking questions? I reached into my bag and pulled out another folder. I set it on the table without opening it. Gregory glanced at it once. What's that, an audit? I said. Marianne frowned. An audit of what? Of the trust? Gregory leaned forward immediately. You don't have the authority to order an audit. I nodded. You're right. I didn't. I opened the folder and turned the first page toward them. But a beneficiary who just turned 18 does. Gregory's eyes flicked down to the document, just for a second. And when that beneficiary starts asking questions, I added, lawyers tend to listen. Marianne's voice sharpened. You hired a lawyer. Not exactly. I tapped the page. The firm handling the review represents the Hale family. Gregory's head came up. The who? The people who originally set up the trust. The air between us shifted. I flipped to the next page. According to the forensic review, about $380,000 moved through the account over the years. Gregory crossed his arms. Education expenses. Some of them. I said. I turned another page. $200,000 transferred into Bennett Logistics 3 years ago. Silence. Marianne looked at Gregory. That was an investment, he said quickly. In your own company. I replied, a family business. I held his gaze. Not my family. Gregory pushed the folder slightly away. This report doesn't prove wrongdoing. No, I said quietly. I slid the last page toward him. Bank transfer records, dates, signatures, but it does show exactly where the money went. Then I sat back. And honestly, the money isn't even the biggest thing I found. Gregory stared at the papers like they might rearrange themselves if he waited long enough. Marianne finally broke the silence. So, what exactly are you trying to do here? Lila, nothing. I said. I'm just telling the truth. Gregory leaned forward. You think this little stunt proves something I didn't answer right away. Instead, I glanced past them, across the restaurant, near the windows, 3 people sitting at another table. They'd been there the whole time. Marianne noticed my eyes shift. What are you looking at? I pointed slightly with my chin. That table. Gregory turned halfway in his chair. Just a quick glance. Then he faced me again, so I folded my hands on the table. That's the other thing I found when I started digging. Marianne's voice tightened. What other thing? I took a breath. For months, I thought the only story here was money. Gregory scoffed. Clearly. But it wasn't. I nodded toward the window again. I didn't just find missing bank records. Both of them turned their heads this time. 3 strangers looking back at us. And I said it quietly. I found my family. The woman at the other table stood up first. For a second, she hesitated, like she wasn't sure if this was the moment we'd agreed on. Then she walked over. Gregory turned fully in his chair. Marianne followed his gaze. The woman stopped beside our table and looked straight at me. Up close, I noticed something strange. Her eyes were the same gray-green as mine. She said my name carefully. Lila, not a question. More like she was making sure the sound was real. I nodded once. Yeah. Her hand came up to her mouth. She took a breath, steadying herself. My name is Rebecca Hale, she said quietly. We spoke on the phone last month. Marianne let out a short laugh. Oh, please. Gregory didn't laugh. He was watching everything too closely. A tall man stepped forward beside Rebecca. Daniel Hale, he said, calm, measured. Behind them, a younger guy stood up awkwardly. Maybe 17. Noah, he said. I'm your brother. For a moment, nobody spoke. Rebecca looked from Gregory to Marianne. 19 years ago, she said slowly. Our daughter was placed under temporary guardianship after a medical emergency during childbirth. Gregory cut in. That's not how legal adoptions work. Rebecca didn't raise her voice. No, it isn't. Daniel set a thin folder on the table. That's why the agency handling the placement in Nevada is currently under investigation. Gregory stared at the documents. Rebecca turned back to me. We didn't want to show up unannounced, she said softly. That's why we waited until you were ready to meet. Gregory pushed his chair back slightly. You planned this, he said. It wasn't really a question. Yeah, I said. I did. Marianne looked from me to Rebecca and back again. This is absurd, she snapped. You drag strangers into a private family dinner and expect us to. They're not strangers, I said. Daniel slid another envelope onto the table. Thick, official looking. Gregory didn't touch it. What is that documentation? Daniel said calmly. Records from the trust audit. And copies of the transfers. Gregory's jaw tightened. You have no idea what you're accusing me of. I do, Daniel replied. $380,000 redirected through Bennett Logistics. The words landed heavy. Marianne shook her head. This is harassment. I leaned forward. No, I said quietly. This is accounting. Gregory finally opened the envelope. His eyes moved fast over the pages. Rebecca didn't say anything. She just stood beside me. Gregory looked up. You're destroying this family. I laughed softly. You mean the business. Marianne slammed her hand on the table. Lila, after everything we did for you, for me, I cut in. The fork beside my plate rattled when I set it down. You told me tonight I wasn't a daughter. Neither of them spoke. I looked at Gregory. You adopted a trust account. Then I looked at both of them. And tonight, that investment closed. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything they'd said all evening. Nobody tried to stop me when I stood up. Gregory was still staring at the papers. Marianne looked like she'd swallowed something bitter and couldn't spit it out. Rebecca touched my arm gently. Lila, she said, you don't have to stay here. I nodded. Yeah, I know. Daniel gave Gregory one last calm look. This conversation isn't over, he said quietly, but tonight isn't about you. Then he turned back to me. Our table is over there. I followed them across the room. The window beside their table was cracked open just enough for cool air from the river to drift inside. Noah pulled out a chair. Hey, he said. I didn't want to interrupt earlier. You're good, I told him. Rebecca sat across from me. She kept studying my face like she was trying to recognize pieces of someone she'd lost a long time ago. You don't have to explain anything tonight, she said. That sentence settled somewhere deep in my chest. For 19 years, I thought family meant staying quiet, not making things complicated. Maybe I was wrong. Sometimes the truth doesn't fix everything. Sometimes it just gives you a place to start. And honestly, that night felt like the first honest moment of my life. If you've ever had a moment like that, where something finally clicks, you probably know exactly what I mean.